The door is already open when I get there. I am standing in my grandmother's kitchen on a Tuesday morning in March 2023, and the door between the kitchen and the back hallway is standing open at the same angle it stood on the 9th morning of February 1996, which is the morning I have been trying not to think about for 27 years. The house smells the way it has always smelled. Wood smoke laid over something older, something that lives in the plaster itself, a mineral cold that no amount of fire has ever entirely pushed out. Damp fieldstone. The particular rot that comes from a crawl space that backs up against a hillside. The smell is not unpleasant. That is the thing I have always had to explain to people who have not been inside this kind of house. It is not unpleasant. It is specific and it is old, and it goes straight to the part of the brain that keeps track of where you come from. I put my hand on the door frame. The wood is smooth, where Pearlie's hand wore it smooth, and rough where no hand ever rested. 2 generations of palms, maybe more. The house was built in 1923 by a man named Clyde Aldridge, who sold it in 1947 to my grandfather, Earl Boggs, who died in 1981 and left it to Pearlie, who died in October 2023 at 98 years old in a hospital bed in Boone, 41 miles from here, which is the farthest she had been from Watauga County in 11 years. I am her granddaughter. I'm 41 years old. I have my grandmother's hands, which is something people say. And in this case, it is precisely true. The same wide palm, the same knuckle that swells in the cold. I can feel the cold right now through the wood of the frame. It is 53 degrees outside and the house reads colder than that, the way these old houses do. I step through the door. The hallway beyond is narrow and dark even in morning light, and at the far end of it the staircase rises toward the second floor. The upstairs back bedroom is the second door on the left. I have not been in that room since February 1996. I am going now. I need to tell you what happened in this house before I can tell you what I found. The storm that locked us in arrived on the 4th of February, which was a Sunday, which was not a school day, which meant Trent and I were already at Pearlie's when the first bands came through. We were supposed to be there for the weekend. I was 13, Trent was 9. The drive from Winston-Salem to Watauga County takes about 2.5 hours in ordinary weather, up through Boone and then back on smaller roads. And our parents had left us Friday evening with the plan to return Sunday afternoon. By Sunday morning, the National Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning that used language I had not seen before. Not advisory, not watch. Warning, with totals that were given in ranges that started at 2 feet. Our mother called at 8 in the morning. I remember the sound of the telephone in Pearlie's kitchen, which was a rotary mounted on the wall beside the refrigerator, and which had a bell ringer rather than an electronic tone, so the ring had weight to it. Pearlie answered on the second ring. She listened for a moment, and then she said, "They'll be fine here. You don't come on these roads." That was not a suggestion. Our mother, who was 42 and had grown up in that house, did not argue. Pearlie hung up and looked at us. Trent was eating oatmeal. I was at the table with a library book I'd brought from home, a paperback about a girl who could talk to horses, which I have not thought about in years and which now seems almost unbearably innocent. Pearlie looked at us for a moment in the way she had, assessingly without sentiment, and then she went to the wood stove in the corner and opened the door to check the fire. "You two know how to stack wood?" she said. Trent said he did. He did not. But by the end of that week, he was better at it than I was, because he was the kind of child who learned by doing, and I was the kind who watched first and did second, and sometimes did not get around to doing it all. The storm made landfall on the mountain faces that afternoon. I use the word landfall knowing it belongs to hurricanes and not to winter systems. But there is no other word that fits what I watched from Pearlie's front window. The wall of white coming across the upper ridge line, like something with intention, something that had been organized and sent. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 inches lay on the ground. By 8 o'clock, it was 14. Pearlie lit the oil lamps she kept on the high shelf above the sink. She had 4 of them, good ones, glass-based with brass fittings. And she set 2 on the kitchen table and 1 on the mantel in the front room and 1 at the top of the stairs. The power went out at 9:17. I know the time because I wrote it in my journal, which I still have. I have been carrying that journal for 28 years in a shoebox that lives in the back of my closet in Asheville. And when Pearlie died in October, and I started thinking about coming back to the house, I got the box down and read it for the first time since 1996. The handwriting is a 13-year-old's handwriting. Careful and round, the letters slightly too large, the pressure heavy enough that you can feel the indentation from the other side of the page. I wrote every day during those 11 days. Some entries are short. The last 3 are very short. But the first several are detailed in the way a bored and bookish child gets detailed. And they give me things I could not have remembered otherwise. Temperatures, times, the exact words Trent said on day 2 when he came in from the porch and stood in the kitchen doorway without taking his boots off, which he knew better than to do. He said, "There's something by the woodpile." I said, "It's probably a raccoon." He said, "I know what a raccoon looks like." That is verbatim from the journal. He was 9 years old and he knew what a raccoon looked like, and he was telling me it was not that. Pearlie was in the front room when he said it. She did not come to the door. She did not ask what he meant. I noted this at the time in the sense that children notice things they cannot yet interpret. A small wrongness filed away. In the journal I wrote, "Pearlie didn't come look. Maybe she was busy." She was not busy. She was sitting in her chair by the fireplace, and she had heard everything he said, and she had chosen not to come look. I understand that now in a way I could not at 13. The woodpile was at the back of the house, maybe 30 feet from the back door, stacked under a lean-to that Earl Boggs had built sometime in the 1960s, against the outside wall of what used to be a smokehouse. Pearlie kept the woodpile well stocked. She had a man named Curtis Presnell come twice a year to split and stack, and he was thorough about it. And by February, she generally had enough wood to carry through to April with room to spare. The lean-to was open on the south side, which is where Trent had been standing when he saw whatever he saw. He never told me what he saw that day. Not in 1996. Not in the years since. When I asked him about it in the summer of 2001, when we were both adults or close enough, he said he remembered standing at the woodpile and he remembered coming inside, but the thing in between had gone soft on him. That is the word he used. Soft. Like the memory had been handled too many times and worn through in the middle. I believe him. The same thing happened to some of mine. By the morning of day 2, the storm had dropped 23 inches, and the roads were impassable in any direction. Pearlie's house sat at the end of a gravel track that ran a quarter-mile off the county road. And the county road itself was a 2-lane that switchbacked up from the valley in 3 places, where the grade ran better than 12%. Even under ordinary snow, those 3 pitches were trouble. Under 23 inches of wet February accumulation, with more coming, they were simply closed. The snowplow district for Watauga County ran its primary routes first, and its secondary routes second, and its tertiary routes, which included ours. When it got around to them, which, given the scale of what had fallen, was not going to be soon. We were 31 miles from the nearest hospital by the faster route, 44 by the route that stayed mostly flat. There was a community of maybe 60 households within a 6-mile radius, most of them on land that families had held for 3 and 4 generations, most of them with wood stoves and root cellars and the accumulated knowledge of how to be cold and isolated and still present in the morning. Pearlie had a hand-crank emergency radio she kept in the bottom drawer of the kitchen hutch. On day 2, she got it out and tuned to the county emergency channel and set it on the kitchen table where it stayed for the rest of our time there, its little speaker putting out a low crackle of reports and road closures and estimated repair schedules that moved backward day by day. The cold inside the house was manageable, with the wood stove burning, but it was not comfortable. Pearlie's system, refined clearly over many winters, was to keep the kitchen warm and let the rest of the house drop. The front room she kept at a moderate temperature with the fireplace going through the day. The upstairs she did not heat at all. She had set Trent and me up in the downstairs back bedroom, which was directly adjacent to the kitchen, and which caught enough radiant warmth to stay above 40 degrees, even with the window loose in its frame. She slept, as she always had, upstairs. On the 3rd day, Trent asked her why she didn't sleep downstairs where it was warmer. She was at the stove turning corn cakes when he asked. She turned one cake over and then another before she answered. "I sleep better up there," she said. Trent looked at me. I looked back at him. We were not warm enough to argue. Pearlie's house had 7 rooms across 2 floors. Kitchen, front room, downstairs bedroom, a small washroom off the back hallway on the 1st floor, and 3 rooms upstairs. The front bedroom where Pearlie slept. A middle room that functioned as storage, and the back bedroom, the second door on the left at the top of the stairs. That back bedroom had a bed in it, a brass-framed single with a horsehair mattress, and a dresser with a mirror, and a window that faced northeast toward the ridge. The door to that room stayed shut. It had stayed shut as far as I could remember from every prior visit. As long as I had been coming to this house, there was no lock on it. There was a latch, a simple hook-and-eye hardware latch, the kind you put on a screen door, mounted on the outside of the door at adult height. The hook was never seated. The door just stayed shut on its own. I noticed the cold from that doorway for the first time on day 3, passing the foot of the stairs on my way to the washroom at 2 a.m. The house had cold pockets. The washroom, the area near the front door where the storm door frame had warped and let in a thin, bright stripe of outside air. But this was a different quality, still and specific, not a draft. I stood at the foot of the stairs for a moment and looked up toward the 2nd floor landing, where Pearlie's oil lamp sat guttering in something. And then I went on to the washroom and went back to bed and wrote nothing about it in my journal that night. Day 4 was the day the storm finished its main push. The snowfall had slowed to intermittent by morning and stopped entirely by 2 in the afternoon. The silence that followed was the kind you only get in deep snow, a muffled and specific silence. The creek at the foot of the property, gone inaudible under ice and accumulation. The dogs on the neighboring property 3 hollows over quiet for the first time in days. 42 inches. I measured it myself with a yardstick I borrowed from Pearlie's utility closet, pushing it straight down into an undisturbed section of the yard just off the back porch. And 42 inches is what I got, which I wrote in the journal with a small amount of the satisfaction a child gets from empirical measurement. The house settled in that silence. Wood-framed houses this old make sounds that have nothing to do with weather or wildlife or human occupants. The long moaning language of timbers under load, the tick and pop of nails contracting, the soft report that comes from somewhere in the structure when the temperature outside drops past a certain point. I know these sounds now, and I knew some of them then. But on the evening of day 4, I was sitting in the kitchen with my library book. I'd already read it once and was reading it again for something to do. And I heard a sound from directly above me that I did not have a category for. Not settling, not contraction. A pressure sound like weight being shifted from one foot to another on a wooden floor. Pearlie was in the front room. Trent was asleep in the back bedroom. The sound was in the upstairs back bedroom. I wrote this in my journal. Heard something upstairs. Probably the roof, settling under the snow. I did not believe it was the roof. I want to be precise about what these days were like as physical experience, because the details matter and because I think people who have not been in this situation, no power, no telephone, beyond the crank emergency radio that received but did not transmit, no vehicle access, 3 people in a house with 7 rooms and 1 working source of heat, tend to imagine it as either more primitive or more cozy than it actually was. The reality was somewhere between the two and more demanding than either. We melted snow for washing water in a pot on the wood stove. Pearlie's well had a hand pump in the kitchen that still pulled from the spring-fed cistern under the house, so we had drinking water. But the pump handle was cold enough that holding it without a rag wrapped around your palm was unpleasant. We ate from what Pearlie had stored, canned goods from the previous summer's garden, dried beans she had put up in mason jars, smoked sausage from a smokehouse 3 farms over that she got every fall by barter. The food was good. She knew what she was doing. But the dark came by 5:30 and the lamps only pushed it back so far, and by 8 o'clock, there was nothing to do but lie in the back bedroom with whatever you'd brought to read or think about, listening to the house. Trent was not a good sleeper under normal circumstances, and he was a worse one in that room. He moved constantly, rolling, resettling, kicking the quilts, and sometimes he talked, the broken muttering of a child, not quite asleep. On the night of day 4, I lay awake listening to him and listening to the house above us and calculating, in the way a bored 13-year-old calculates, how long it would take for the roads to clear. The answer, though I did not know it then, was 7 more days. Day 5 arrived on a Thursday, and it arrived the way February mornings arrive in those mountains after a major storm. Pale gray, the light coming up slow and diffuse, the sky packed with low cloud that the snow had left behind, the temperature having dropped overnight into the single digits. The thermometer on the back porch read 7 degrees at first light. I know because I went and looked. I had taken to doing this, getting up before Trent and going to the kitchen to check the thermometer before Pearlie was up, which felt like the kind of useful thing a nearly adult person could do. It also gave me a few minutes alone, which I had come to need. Pearlie was not asleep. I came through the hallway in the dark and pushed open the kitchen door, and she was sitting at the table. The lamp was burning low on the table in front of her. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was dressed, not in a robe, in her actual clothes, the dark wool dress she wore most days, and the thick-soled lace-up boots she had worn for as long as I had been alive. Her reading glasses were not on her face. She was not doing anything. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, and she was looking at the chair across from her, the empty chair on the far side of the table, and she was talking. Not praying, not reading aloud, talking at normal conversational volume in the cadence of a real exchange. Short sentences, pauses, as though someone was answering. I stopped in the doorway. The cold from the hallway was still moving around me, and the lamp on the table cast a small circle of yellow light that reached as far as the counter and no farther. Outside, the wind had come up in the hour before dawn, and I could hear it pushing at the south wall of the house, which was the sound of loose clapboard and old weather stripping doing what it could. My feet were cold inside my wool socks. I stood in the doorway and I did not move, and I listened. She said, "They'll be gone soon enough." A pause. She said, "I know what I said." Another pause. Longer. She said, "You leave the boy alone." She said this with the same tone she used for everything, flat, practical, carrying no particular affect. It was the tone she had used when she was a one-room school teacher in Cove Creek for 19 years, a tone that had been calibrated for rooms full of children of varying ages and varying willingness, a tone that did not negotiate, except that she was manifestly negotiating. The sentence was a negotiation. "You leave the boy alone," which implied that leaving the boy alone was something that might not be done without instruction. I stepped back into the hallway. My hand was against the wall behind me, and the plaster was cold and rough under my palm, the texture of old horsehair plaster that has been painted over many times and has started in places to bubble away from the lath beneath. I stood there for what I believe was about 4 minutes. Then I went back to the bedroom and climbed into the bed next to Trent, who was warm in the way sleeping children are warm. And I lay there with my eyes open until the light came up. I wrote in the journal, "Grandma up early again. She must not sleep much." I did not write what she said. I want to tell you what I knew at 13, which is different from what I can say at 41. At 13, I knew that my grandmother was a serious woman and a rational one. She had been educated, she read, she had strong views on practical matters. She was not given to what she called foolishness. I knew that adults sometimes did things that children were not meant to observe. I knew that the house had sounds and a cold in specific places, and that Trent had seen something by the woodpile and hadn't told me what. What I was assembling from those pieces was not a coherent picture. It was a set of data points that did not yet add up to anything I had language for. I was 13. I needed a category, and I did not have one. The category came from Pearlie herself. It just came later than it should have, and in a form I had not anticipated. Those first 4 days after the snowfall stopped were in some ways the most difficult. The physical conditions did not improve. The temperature stayed low, the snow did not melt, the roads remained closed. But the psychological pressure shifted because the snow was no longer an active event, and we had nothing left to do but wait. Pearlie managed the waiting with the same efficiency she managed everything else. She gave us tasks. She had Trent splitting kindling with a small hatchet she supervised carefully. She had me cataloging her pantry and making a written list of what she had and what she was running low on. And in the afternoons, she sat with us at the kitchen table and played Rummy and 21 and a card game she called Setback, which I have never been able to find in any card game book, and which she may have invented or which may have been local to these mountains in the way that certain things are local without being documented. On day 6, Trent won 4 straight hands of Setback, and Pearlie looked at him across the table with what might have been respect. She said, "Your granddaddy played that same way, quick and mean." Trent said, "Did he live here?" She said, "He died here." There was a pause, and then Trent said, "Which room?" It was a child's question, direct, without calculation. Pearlie looked at him for a moment without expression. "Upstairs," she said, and she collected the cards and shuffled them. She did not say which room upstairs. Trent did not ask. I did not ask either, though I wrote it in the journal that night and underlined it once. Earl Boggs had died in March 1981, a Wednesday morning, of what was at that time still called a heart attack, and what we would now specify more carefully. He had been 69 years old. He and Pearlie had lived in this house since 1947, 34 years, which meant that Pearlie had lived alone in this house for 15 years by the time we were snowed in. 15 years as of 1996, exactly 15, because Earl died in March of 1981. I understood these facts at 13 without understanding their significance. Pearlie had been alone here for a long time. That was the fact I had. The significance was this: she hadn't been alone. Day 7. I want to be precise here because the order matters. Day 7 was a Saturday, the 10th of February, and it was the day I went upstairs for the first time since the storm. Not intentionally. I went to the landing to retrieve Pearlie's oil lamp, which she had asked me to bring down because the wick needed trimming, and she had the wick scissors in the kitchen drawer. The lamp was at the top of the stairs on the small table Pearlie kept there, and getting it meant climbing the stairs, which I did, and reaching the landing, which I did, and picking up the lamp with both hands to keep it from spilling, which I did. And while I was doing all of that, I was standing 12 feet from the door to the back bedroom. The door was open, not standing open, not ajar. Open roughly 45 degrees, held there by nothing because the floor upstairs was level enough that a door did not drift. The hook and eye latch on the outside was not engaged. The room beyond the door was dark in the way rooms are dark in winter mountain houses in the middle of the day when the sky is overcast. A flat and total darkness, not relieved by anything because the snow against the northeast window had blocked what little light would have come from that direction. I stood on the landing with the lamp in both hands, and I looked at the open door for 10 or 12 seconds. Then I went back downstairs. I told Pearlie the lamp wick was trimmed. It was not. She looked at me and said nothing. That night, the 7th night, I heard the sound again from the room above. The same sound as day 4, weight redistributing on an old floor, but this time it did not stop after 1 or 2 iterations. It continued slowly in the pattern of someone walking without particular urgency from one side of the room to the other, pausing, returning. I lay in the dark with my eyes open and Trent asleep beside me, and I counted. 14 passes, at a pace I estimated at about 1 every 40 seconds. Not mechanical, not regular in the metronomic sense. There were variations, longer pauses, one brief stop in the middle that lasted nearly 3 minutes, and then the walking again. It stopped sometime around 3 in the morning and did not resume. Trent slept through it. Or I believed he did. I was wrong about that, but I did not find out until much later. On day 8, I watched Pearlie go upstairs in the morning and come back down 15 minutes later. I did not ask what she had done up there. I did not ask because some part of me, the part that had stood on the landing looking at the open door and then lied about the wick, had decided that I did not want the answer yet. This is not courage or its absence. This is 13 years old, alone with 2 people across 11 days of winter dark, maintaining the equilibrium that made it possible to eat corn cakes at breakfast and play setback in the afternoon and lie down at night without the thing you were not asking about becoming the only thing in the room. Here is what I knew on day 8 that I had not known on day 1. The cold in the back doorway upstairs was not a draft. The sound in the back bedroom was not the roof. Pearlie's pre-dawn kitchen conversations were not insomnia or prayer or lonely old age. Something was in the house with us, and Pearlie knew it, and Pearlie had known it, and her knowing it was old and structured and had nothing of the quality of fear in it. That last part is what I couldn't assemble into anything coherent at 13. An old woman not afraid is one thing. An old woman not afraid because she has made arrangements is something else entirely. I wrote in my journal on day 8, I think Grandma knows the house better than she's told anyone. That was as close as I got. The midpoint of this story is the morning of day 8, which is also the morning Pearlie, without being asked, sat down across from me at the kitchen table while Trent was outside checking the thermometer. He had taken over that task from me and told me something she prefaced with a sentence I have thought about many times. She said, I'm going to tell you a little of this because you're old enough and because you've been quiet about it, which I appreciate. I was 13. I sat very still. She said Earl had noticed it first, within 6 months of moving in. Not sounds, not cold, nothing that obvious. He said the house felt like it had already been sorted, already been lived in, down to its bones by something that knew it better than they ever would. He had not been frightened by this. He had been, by his wife's account, mildly impressed. Earl Boggs had been a man who respected competence wherever he found it, and whatever was in this house was competent. It had been there longer than the Aldridges. It had probably been there longer than the name for the hollow. Pearlie said that Earl had developed what she called an understanding with whatever it was over the course of the first year. Not a negotiation exactly, not in words, not the way Pearlie later conducted it, but a mutual acknowledgement. He was not going to try to move it, and it was not going to make the house impossible to live in, and inside those terms, they had shared the space for 34 years, without incident. His word, she said, was incident. They had shared it without incident. When he died in the upstairs back bedroom on a Wednesday morning in March 1981, she was downstairs in the kitchen and she heard him fall. She said, I went up and sat with him until he was gone, and then I sat with whatever else was up there until I knew what it wanted. She stopped. I said, what did it want? She looked at me for a moment the way she looked at hands of cards. She said the same thing was already in the house. To keep being in the house. Trent came in then, red-faced from the cold, announcing it was 12 degrees, and that there was a hawk on the fence post by the garden, which there was a Cooper's hawk, which he had identified incorrectly. It was almost certainly a sharp-shinned, given the size and location. And Pearlie turned her full attention to him and told him about the time Earl had found a red-tailed hawk trapped in the smokehouse, and the conversation moved on the way conversations do, and she did not say another word about it that day. But here's the thing the journal tells me that I could not remember without it. I wrote 6 pages that night. 6 pages, which is more than any other single entry across the 11 days. It is the longest thing I wrote until I was in college. And in those 6 pages, I was working through something specific, the way a 13-year-old who has been raised to be careful with information works through something that does not fit any existing category. I was not frightened. I was orienting. What I wrote, in that laborious round handwriting, with the lamp burning on the dresser, and Trent asleep beside me and the sound not yet having started in the room above, was this. She's been talking to it every night for 15 years. She talks to it the way she talks to the county road office when she needs something done, like it's inconvenient but manageable. I don't think she's scared of it. I don't think she ever was. I think Grandpa wasn't either. I think this is just a thing about this house that they knew and nobody else did, and now I know it too, and I don't know what you're supposed to do with something like that. What you are supposed to do with something like that, I've been working out ever since. 15 years. That was the number Pearlie had confirmed without intending to. She had been conducting those early morning conversations since Earl died in 1981, and it was now February 1996. 15 years of pre-dawn negotiations in a cold kitchen. Her hands folded in her lap, talking to the empty chair across the table, keeping some kind of arrangement in place. The arrangement that Earl had established with his wordless competence and his 34 years of coexistence, that Pearlie had formalized into something more like a contract. She had told it on some morning in 1981 what she needed. She had told it on some morning since that her grandchildren would be coming. She'd told it on the morning I stood in the doorway to leave the boy alone. The storm had not created the presence. The storm had made it impossible to maintain the polite fiction that the presence was manageable in the way that a leaky roof or a temperamental well was manageable, handled privately between Pearlie and the house, with no one else needing to know. But we were there, and the presence, if it had been respecting distance before, was now showing less inclination to do that. Whether this was the snow, the weight of it, the silence it made, the way it removed all the ordinary noise and movement that ordinarily kept the house calibrated to the human, or whether it was simply the unusual presence of 2 children in a house that had held only one person for 15 years, I do not know. Pearlie did not say, and I did not ask. And by the time I was old enough to ask, well, she was old enough that our conversations had other priorities. What I know is that on the night of day 9, the 9th night, a Sunday, the 11th of February, something changed. Day 9 was the day Pearlie had been in the kitchen at 3 a.m. for a conversation that ran longer than usual. I knew it had run longer than usual because I had woken at 2:45 to the sound of her feet on the kitchen floor. She had a specific gait, a slight drag of the left heel, that her orthopedic shoes could not entirely correct. And by the time I fell back asleep, it was past 4 and she was still up. I lay in that interval between sleep and not sleep, and I listened to her voice below the floor carrying on in that flat, practical school teacher's tone, and once I heard her pause, longer than usual, and then say in a voice just slightly altered, not louder, not softer, but more careful, I said no. Just that. I said no. And then silence. And then the conversation resuming at its previous register, and then eventually her feet crossing to the stove, and the sound of the damper being adjusted, and then quiet. Trent woke up at 7. He sat up in the bed and he looked at the ceiling. We were directly below the back bedroom, and the back bedroom was the room with the brass bed and the horsehair mattress and the northeast window packed with snow. And he said, without preamble, without looking at me, "It was in here last night." I said, "What?" He said, "In this room, when you were asleep. It stood by the door for a while." I said, "Trent." He said, "I know what I saw." He got up and put on his pants and went to the kitchen, and I heard Pearlie ask him if he wanted oatmeal, and he said yes. That was the last time either of us spoke about it directly during those 11 days. He had told me what he saw. He understood I believed him. There was nothing further to negotiate on that point. What Trent saw in the downstairs bedroom on the night of day 9 is what I need to lay alongside what I saw in the upstairs back bedroom on the same night. I need to tell you this carefully. At 11:47, I know the time because I wrote it, and I wrote it because the act of recording felt like the only thing I could do that was useful. I woke to a cold I had not felt before in that room. The cold in the house was a familiar quantity at that point, a known element I had learned to account for, but this was different from the ambient cold of an unheated house. It came from a direction, which was the doorway. The door between the hallway and the bedroom was open about 8 inches, which was how we kept it for the heat, and the cold came through that 8-inch gap with a specificity that the ambient cold did not have. Specific and still, not a draft. I lay in the bed and I did not move. The lamp was burned down but not out, and the room was in a dim and shifting light that made edges uncertain. The doorway was a darker rectangle against the dark of the room. I lay looking at it. There was something in the doorway. I will not tell you what it looked like because I do not trust that part of the memory. 28 years is a long time, and the brain does things to memories that are held that long without being examined. And I examined this one too much in the years when I was trying not to examine it. So whatever I saw has been worked over in ways I cannot fully account for. What I can tell you is the physical register of the thing, the cold, which I have described, the sense of a presence that the word presence barely reaches, the fact that Trent's breathing changed beside me. He was not asleep, he was very awake and very still, in the particular stillness of a 9-year-old boy keeping himself quiet on purpose. And then, for a period I cannot accurately estimate, but which felt like 4 or 5 minutes, nothing. And then the cold moved. Not the way a person moves, with the sounds that a person makes. No foot on a floor, no cloth against cloth. The cold redistributed. It was not in the doorway anymore. The doorway was simply the doorway again, the same dark rectangle, the same 8-inch gap, with the same faint warmth of the hallway beyond. I lay in the bed for a long time after. At some point before dawn, I heard Pearlie in the kitchen. Her voice was sharp and short, and I could not make out the words. Day 10 was quiet in the way that the day after something has happened is quiet. Pearlie was up and functioning by the time we were in the kitchen, the oatmeal already made, the fire stoked, the radio on and putting out a weather report that mentioned improving conditions and a projected clearing. She looked at us, first at me, then at Trent, with that assessing look, and something in her face shifted almost imperceptibly. She knew. She had known something had gotten through, because she had been in the kitchen before dawn trying to pull it back, and she had not entirely succeeded. And now her grandchildren were sitting at her table, looking the way you look when something has changed your baseline. She sat down with us. She said, "Did you sleep all right?" Trent said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "Mostly." She poured herself coffee from the percolator she kept warm on the back of the stove, and she wrapped both hands around the mug, the wide-palmed hands I have inherited, and she looked at the window where the snow was bright and terrible in the morning light, and she said, "One more day, maybe two." She did not mean the snow, or she meant the snow and she meant something else. Day 10 was the day she told us the rest of it, not at the table. Later in the afternoon, when the light was thinning toward early evening, and Trent was on the back porch, despite the cold, where he had taken to sitting on the steps and watching the tree line the way a child watches something he has decided to understand. Pearlie sat in the front room in her chair, and I sat on the footstool near the fireplace, which was my chair for those 11 days, the place I'd established as mine. And she began talking without preamble in the way she had of beginning things in the middle. Earl Boggs had come from Carter County, which sits just north of Watauga, on the other side of the Doe River watershed. His family had been in those mountains since before the Civil War and before the land surveys and before most of the documentation that lets historians say, with confidence, who owned what and when. His grandfather, Pearlie, called him Old Harlan to distinguish him from several subsequent Harlans, had understood a certain quality of mountain land, which was that some land and some structures were old enough to have acquired what she called a specific gravity. Her phrase. She used it deliberately, a one-room school teacher reaching for precision. Specific gravity, a weight that attracted and held certain things. Old Harlan had told Earl this, Earl had told Pearlie, and when they moved into the Aldrich house in 1947 and felt, within the first weeks, the quality of the house, its weight, its sense of being already occupied at some level below the visible, Earl had understood it as what his grandfather had described. Not supernatural exactly. Specific. The thing in the house had not come with the house. Pearlie was clear on this. It was not something Earl or the Aldriches had introduced. It had come to the land long before the house was built, and the house had been built in a place that drew it, and there it had remained. The Aldriches, as far as she knew, had made their own understanding with it over their 24 years in the house, and when they sold the place, they had said nothing. She paused here and pressed her lips together. They had said nothing because you do not say something like this and be believed, and you do not say it and not be believed, because both outcomes are equally impossible to manage. She had told no one in 24 years, not her daughters, not Trent's mother, not my mother. No one. She said, "I'm telling you because you've seen enough that the not knowing is worse than the knowing." I said, "What do you get out of it? The arrangement." She looked at me. She said, "The house stays sound. The land stays productive. Nothing happens to anybody in this family that comes from the house." She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, "Nothing happens from the house. What happens from other directions I've got no purchase on." I thought about this for a long time before I asked, "Is that a trade you made, or one that was already in place?" She set down her coffee mug on the arm of the chair and looked at the fire. "Both," she said, "and neither. You'll understand that better when you're older." "I am 41. I understand it some." What I understood then was that my grandmother had been conducting a 15-year management of something she had inherited from her husband, who had inherited it from the land, who had inherited it from a history she could not fully trace. She was not a woman given to performance or ornament. She managed the farm, she managed the winter, she managed the county road office when the gravel washed out, and she managed the thing in the upstairs back bedroom with the same combination of practicality and implacability she brought to everything else. She was 71 years old. She had been at this since she was 56. The arrangement was working, had been working, was going to keep working for as long as she was able to hold up her end of it. What her end was precisely, she did not say. I did not ask. The not asking is one of the things I carry. Day 11 arrived on a Tuesday, the 13th of February, at a temperature of 22 degrees, with a wind that had shifted to the northwest overnight, and which had the particular quality of a wind that has decided to do something, clearing, drying, the first real movement of air in 11 days. The snow at the edges of the porch had begun to look granular rather than solid. Somewhere to the south, the county snowplow was working its way up from the valley, and by early afternoon I could hear it, a low diesel grind moving through the hollow, still a long way off. At 9:18 in the morning, 9:18 I wrote it down, exact, the power came back. The lights in the kitchen came on all at once, flooding the room with the flat overhead brightness that I had not seen in 11 days, and which was, in that moment, almost violent in its ordinariness. The refrigerator started its compressor hum. The clock on the microwave began blinking. The radio on the counter that we had not touched, a normal electric radio, not the hand crank, began putting out a country station from Boone at low volume, the tail end of a song I did not recognize. Pearlie was standing at the stove. She looked up at the lights. She stood very still for a moment, and I watched her do something I had not seen her do in 11 days. She let her shoulders drop. Not a collapse, a release. The way a person's shoulders move when a weight they have been carrying has been set down for a moment, not removed, not gone, just briefly, not born. She turned off the burner on the stove. She pulled back a chair at the kitchen table and sat down. She looked at the table surface. She said, "Ayin, come sit down, both of you." Trent came in from the hallway. We sat. She said, "I need to tell you one more thing, and then I need you to carry it the way you'd carry anything that was heavy and private." Trent looked at his hands on the table. She said, "Last night I told it the terms for the next stretch. The same terms we've always had. Same as your grandfather made. Same as I've held since." She stopped. It agreed. "The same as always." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "The house sounds different this morning. You'll learn to hear it if you pay attention long enough." She was right. I heard it then, though I could not have said what I was hearing. A quality of the silence between the refrigerator's hum and the radio's murmur. A settling, not the tension settling of wood contracting in cold, but a different register entirely. Like a room after an argument has been resolved. Like a breath let out. She said, "Now, your mother is going to call this afternoon when the line's clear, and when she asks you what you did for 11 days, I'd like you to tell her about the card games and the corn cakes, and that you learned to split kindling, which is the truth." Trent said, "It's not all of it." She looked at him. He was 9 years old, and he had just told her he understood the difference between a partial truth and a lie, and he was not entirely willing to commit to one. She said, "No, it's not all of it. The rest of it belongs to this house." She put one hand flat on the table, palm down, and held it there for a moment, the way you put your hand on a thing to mark it. "Some things," she said, "you keep." The snowplow reached the county road end of our track at 3 p.m. Our mother called at 3:47. I told her about the corn cakes and the setback and the kindling and the hawk on the fence post that Trent had misidentified. My mother laughed. She said she'd known Pearlie could manage, and she'd not worried much. She said she'd been by twice during the storm to check on things from the county road end, and everything had looked fine from there. The lights in the house, she said, had been on every night she checked. She said this without any awareness of what she was saying. The lights had been out. We had run on oil lamps for 11 days. The power had come back at 9:18 that morning. I did not say any of this. I looked at Pearlie across the kitchen, where she was putting away the oil lamps. Careful, methodical, wrapping each one in its cloth. And Pearlie looked back at me, and neither of us said anything. Our parents arrived the next afternoon, Wednesday the 14th, and we drove back to Winston-Salem on roads that were passable but still edged with gray-white walls of snow pushed to the shoulders. I sat in the back seat and looked at the mountains reducing behind us, and Trent sat beside me and fell asleep before we reached Boone. And I wrote in my journal. I had it open on my lap for the drive, which I sometimes did. But what I wrote was not about the house. I wrote about the hawk on the fence post, which I had told my mother was a Cooper's and which I now believed was a sharp-shinned, and the distinction between the two and how you could tell from size and tail shape and the way each one flew when it lifted off. And I wrote 2 pages about that, closely observed, in the round, careful handwriting of a 13-year-old, and I didn't write another word about Pearlie's house for 28 years. Pearlie lived in that house until 2019, when her youngest daughter finally convinced her to move to an assisted living facility in Boone, where she lived for 4 more years and died in October 2023, 98 years old, in full possession of her faculties, in the way that certain mountain people are in full possession of their faculties right to the end, sharp and private and exact. She did not talk about the house in those last years, as far as I know. I visited her 4 times, and we talked about many things. And she asked me once if I'd gone back to the house since she'd moved out, and I told her I hadn't, and she said, "You should go. It doesn't like being empty." She said it the way you'd say a plant doesn't like being unwatered. Management language, not alarm. The house doesn't like being empty, so someone should go and make a presence there. Make some kind of acknowledgement that the arrangement was still in the minds of the people who were party to it. Pearlie died October 17th, 2023. I started thinking about going back in November. I came in March. I'm in the back hallway right now at the foot of the stairs. The house has been empty for 4 years. It smells the same. That mineral cold wood smoke underneath decades of wood smoke. The rot under the floor. And it is cold in the way an unheated house in Watauga County is cold in early March, which is thoroughly cold, reaching through your coat cold. My breath moves in small clouds. The floor under my feet is the same wide plank pine floor it has always been. A little more sprung in one board near the door than I remember. the finish worn to bare wood in the path between the kitchen and the stairs. The second door on the left at the top of the stairs is closed. I have Pearlie's journal in my coat pocket. Not mine, hers. I found it in her room at the assisted living facility when I was helping clear her things. It is a small composition book, the black and white marbled cover kind, and it covers the years 1981 to 1993, the first 12 years of her widowhood, and it is the most matter-of-fact document I've ever read. She wrote the dates and temperatures, and what she planted and what she put up, and the condition of the road and what the radio said the weather was going to do. And interspersed through all of this in the same handwriting, with no more or less emphasis than the temperature readings, she wrote short entries about her conversations with the thing in the house. I will read you the entry from March 12th, 1981, which is 2 days after Earl Boggs died. She wrote, "Cold again. Came above 0 by noon. Harley P. came to check on the pipes. Told him they were fine. Sat with the house this evening, asked if E was still here in any way, and the answer was not to my liking, but I accept it. Earl is gone. The house has the arrangement we made, and I'll hold it. Told it I was staying, and it could go on as it has. It accepted. Made cornbread for dinner. Shoulder still aching." That is the entry. That is the whole entry. The shoulder still aching. The cornbread for dinner. The acceptance of the terms. I have read that entry perhaps 40 times since I found the journal, and each time what I feel is not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. A recognition of the quality of this woman, the tremendous ordinary courage of it, the way she had filed the negotiation of a 15-year household haunting, between a checkup on the pipes and the business of cooking herself dinner. She was alone. She had been a school teacher, and she was a serious woman, and she was 56 years old, and she had just buried her husband, and she sat with the house and made her terms and went to make cornbread. I put my foot on the first stair. The wood takes my weight with the sound that old stairs make. Not a creak exactly, a voiced complaint. The stair acknowledging the pressure and working out whether to hold. It holds. They all hold, one after another, each with its own register, the fourth from the bottom the loudest, which I remembered before I reached it, and then forgot. And then the sound of it brought the memory back whole, the way smells do, the way the specific pitch of a sound in a specific place does, carrying everything that was attached to it in the original moment. The landing. Pearlie's lamp table is still there. The lamp is not. She took her lamps when she moved, or someone did. The table is bare. The door to the front bedroom stands open. The door to the middle storage room stands open. The door to the back bedroom, second on the left, stands closed. The cold that comes from the gap at the bottom of the door is not the ambient cold of an unheated room. I know the difference. I have known it since I was 13 years old. Standing in a kitchen doorway, listening to my grandmother negotiate with whatever this house has held since before anyone now alive drew their first breath. I know the difference between cold that is the absence of heat and cold that is the presence of something. I walk the length of the hallway. The floorboards say what they say. I stand in front of the door. I have been thinking for the 4 months between Pearlie's death and this moment about what I'm going to do when I get here. I have been thinking about the entry in her journal and about what she said the last time I saw her, that the house doesn't like being empty, and about what Trent said in 2001 when I asked about the memory gone soft. He had looked at me across a restaurant table in Charlotte and said, "Some things you just leave where they fell." And I had nodded because I understood what he meant, and also because I had, up to that point, been doing exactly that. I have Pearlie's journal in my pocket. I put my hand on the door. The wood is cold. Not rough. Smooth, worn smooth, by a hand that opened and closed this door for 52 years, the hand that had the same wide palm I have. My hand in Pearlie's handprint on a door that opens to whatever she has left behind. I am not going to tell you I was not afraid. My heart was running at a pace I was aware of. My jaw was clenched in the way it clenches when I am trying to stay level, which Trent would recognize from our childhood. The same habit we share, the same jaw we got from our mother who got it from Pearlie. I open the door. The room beyond is dark in the middle of a March morning because the snow that was packed against the northeast window in February 1996 has been replaced by pine branches that have grown up against the house in 4 years of emptiness, blocking most of the light. The brass bed is still there. The horsehair mattress is still there, the surface of it dimmed with 4 years of dust. The dresser with the mirror is still there, the mirror dark and spotted at the edges with the silver loss that old mirrors develop over decades. The room smells of closed years, damp plaster. Something beneath it, mineral and still. The cold is everywhere in this room, pervasive. The room is saturated with it. I stand in the doorway and I look at the bed and the dresser and the mirror and the window behind the pine branches and I listen. The floor does not make any sound. Nothing redistributes. The room is a room in an empty house in early March, in the mountains of Watauga County, cold and dark and full of the quiet that 4 years of emptiness makes. I step inside. I cross to the center of the room. I stand there for a long moment with Pearlie's journal in my hand, not opened. I do not know the terms of the arrangement she made. I do not know what she gave or what she kept or what the thing in this house understood about the family of the woman who had held the terms for 42 years. I do not know if it knows she is gone. I say out loud in this cold, dark room with the pine branches pressing against the window glass and the mirror going dark at its edges. I say what I came to say, which is short and which I am not going to repeat here because some things you keep. I stand there for a while after. The room does not change while I'm in it. The floor does not speak. The cold does not redistribute. If there is an acknowledgement, it is in the quality of the stillness, which may be nothing at all, and which I have decided to treat as an answer. I go back down the stairs. I stand in the kitchen for a few minutes. The kitchen where Pearlie made her cornbread and played her setback and sat in the dark with her hands in her lap and kept 30 years of mornings for the sake of a house and a land and a family who did not know what she was keeping it for. The linoleum floor is the same pattern it was in 1996. A pale yellow with a fleur-de-lis border that has worn through at the stove and the sink. The table is still in the center. 4 chairs. One of them, the chair on the far side, that she used to face when she was talking in the dark. I sit down in Pearlie's chair. I put the journal on the table. I sit there for a while and I let the house be quiet around me and I let the cold be what it is, and I do not try to interpret what the room upstairs is doing. Because I am not Pearlie, and I have not made any terms. and I do not know enough to do what she did. What I know is that I came here, and I said what I said, and the house is still standing. And the floor held my weight, going up and coming back down. And the brass bed is still in the room where Earl Boggs died in March of 1981, and where my grandmother sat beside him until he was gone, and then sat a while longer with whatever else was in the room. Here is what I have to confess at the end of this. I have a daughter. She is 11 years old, which is 2 years younger than I was in February 1996. And she has my grandmother's wide-palmed hands and my grandmother's way of looking at a thing before she comments on it, which is a way that suggests she is seeing more than she is saying. I have never brought her to this house. I have been deliberate about this. I have told myself it is because the house is in disrepair and it is not safe for a child, which is true enough that I could believe it for a while. What I haven't said to her or anyone is this. I do not know what Pearlie negotiated in those last years, the years after I became an adult and Trent became an adult and our mother died and Pearlie got older and the house got older and the arrangement presumably continued. And I do not know if what she negotiated included us. The next generation, the grandchildren who were in the house during those 11 days in 1996, who saw what we saw, who carry what we carry. I do not know if the arrangement extends to my daughter. I sat in Pearlie's kitchen chair and I looked at the empty chair across the table and I thought about this. And then I thought about what Pearlie said on the afternoon of day 10 in the front room by the dying fire, when I asked her if the arrangement was one she had made or one that was already in place. She said both and neither. She said I would understand better when I was older. I am 41. I understand it this much. The house has specific gravity, the same way certain land does, the same way certain families do, and you do not choose what pulls at you and what you are pulled toward. You only choose how you stand when you get there. My daughter has Pearlie's hands. I have been teaching her to read weather, to distinguish a Cooper's from a sharp-shinned, to put her hand on wood and feel the difference between a draft and something else. I don't know if I'm preparing her or I'm pulling her in. I don't know if Pearlie knew either. In 1947, the morning she and Earl first walked into this house and felt what it was, felt the weight of it, felt the specific gravity of a place that had already decided what it was going to keep, whether she knew that what she was doing was choosing or whether the choice had been made before she arrived, before any of them arrived, in the long pre-history of a hollow in Watauga County, where the land itself had learned what it wanted and had been patient about it ever since. The cold in this kitchen is the cold of an empty house in March. I pick up Pearlie's journal and put it back in my coat pocket. I sit there a minute more in the chair that faced the empty chair and I listen to the house. The pipes, the wind off the ridge, the sound the old wood makes when it works. And underneath all of it, in the place where sound becomes something else entirely, the thing that has no name and needs none, which has been here longer than the house and longer than the family and longer than the memory of anyone now alive to tell it, and which has, for reasons it has never explained to anyone who was in a position to understand the answer, decided that this is the place it stays. I leave the front door standing open when I go, the way Pearlie always did.